The sun had barely risen over the small village when Kofi stepped out of his tiny mud hut. The morning air was cool, and a thin mist rested gently on the tall grasses surrounding the village. Roosters crowed in the distance, and women were already lighting their cooking fires. It was the beginning of another long day. Kofi stretched his tired arms and looked down at his worn sandals. They were old and cracked, just like most of the things he owned. Life had never been easy for him. Since the day he lost his parents as a young boy, he had lived alone, surviving with nothing but determination and hard work. Every morning, Kofi would wake before the sun and walk several miles to the forest. There, he cut firewood, gathered fruits, and carried heavy bundles back to the village market. Sometimes he earned a few coins. Other days, people bargained so much that he barely earned enough to buy a small bowl of food. But despite the struggles, Kofi had something many people in the village did not have: a good heart. If an old woman needed help carrying water, Kofi would help her. If a child fell while playing, he would pick them up and comfort them. Even when he had very little food, he sometimes shared it with someone who had none. "Kindness will not make you rich," some villagers would mock him. But Kofi would only smile quietly. Deep inside his heart, he carried a dream that one day his life would change. One hot afternoon, while Kofi was selling firewood at the village market, a loud sound echoed through the streets. Boom! 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 It was the royal drum. The entire market froze. People dropped their baskets and rushed toward the center of the village square. Whenever the royal drum sounded, it meant an important announcement from the palace. Curious, Kofi placed his bundle of firewood down and followed the crowd. In the center of the square stood the king's royal messenger, dressed in bright red robes. 2 guards stood beside him holding long golden spears. The messenger lifted a long scroll and spoke in a loud, powerful voice. "People of the kingdom, hear the words of the great king." The crowd fell silent. "Our beloved princess has come of age. The king has decided that it is time for her to marry." Excited whispers spread through the crowd. "The king has announced a challenge," the messenger continued. "Any man who wishes to marry the princess must complete a task that only the brave and worthy can achieve." Everyone leaned forward, eager to hear more. "The challenge is this," the messenger said. "Whoever can travel to the Forbidden Mountain, bring back the golden flower that grows at its peak, and return within 7 days will win the hand of the princess." For a moment, the entire square was silent. Then the crowd erupted with shock and disbelief. "The Forbidden Mountain," someone shouted. "That place is cursed. Many travelers have entered that mountain and never returned." But among the crowd, the young men, especially the rich and powerful, began to smile with confidence. "I will go," one wealthy merchant declared. "I have strong guards and the fastest horses," another nobleman bragged. Soon, many powerful men from the kingdom prepared themselves for the challenge. They rode out with fine horses, shining swords, and large groups of servants. Days passed. One by one, the men returned from the journey, but none of them had the golden flower. Some came back injured. Some returned empty-handed. And some never returned at all. Fear slowly spread throughout the kingdom. The challenge seemed impossible. One evening, Kofi sat outside his small hut eating the little food he had managed to buy that day. As he watched the sunset paint the sky in deep orange and purple colors, he thought about the announcement. The golden flower. The Forbidden Mountain. And the princess. Kofi had never seen the princess before, but everyone in the kingdom spoke of her beauty, kindness, and gentle heart. He stared quietly at the horizon, his mind filled with thoughts. "What if I try?" he whispered to himself. The idea seemed crazy. He had no horse, no sword, no servants. But something inside him refused to stay silent. The next morning, Kofi walked to the village square where people were gathered, discussing the failed attempts of the rich men. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. "I will go to the Forbidden Mountain," he said. For a moment, the crowd stared at him in silence. Then laughter exploded through the square. "You," one man shouted between laughs. "The poor firewood boy? You can barely feed yourself," another mocked. An old woman shook her head. "Child, that mountain has swallowed stronger men than you." Even Kofi's neighbors laughed loudly. "Go home, Kofi," someone said. "Dreams are for people with power." But Kofi stood quietly, his face calm. "I may be poor," he said softly, "but I am not afraid to try." The laughter slowly faded as people stared at him. Without another word, Kofi turned and began walking back to his hut. The villagers continued shaking their heads. None of them believed he would succeed. None of them believed a poor boy could change his destiny. But deep inside Kofi's heart, a small flame of hope had already begun to burn. And by the next sunrise, the poor boy who had nothing, would begin a journey that would change his life forever. The first light of dawn crept slowly across the sky as Kofi stepped out of his small hut. The village was still quiet, with only the soft sound of birds singing in the trees. A gentle wind moved through the tall grass, whispering like a secret. Today was the day. Kofi adjusted the small cloth bag hanging over his shoulder. Inside it was all he owned for the journey, a piece of dry bread, a small calabash of water, and a walking stick he had carved himself. It was not much, but it was enough to begin. He took one last look at the village that had been his home all his life. Many people still believed he was foolish for attempting the king's challenge. Some had laughed at him openly. Others had simply shaken their heads in pity. But Kofi did not let their words fill his heart with doubt. Instead, he whispered quietly to himself, "Every great journey begins with one step." And with that, he began walking toward the distant mountains. The road was long and dusty. The sun climbed higher into the sky, and soon the heat became unbearable. Kofi's legs grew tired, but he continued walking with determination. Hours later, as he passed through a small forest path, he suddenly heard a weak cry. "Help, please help." Kofi stopped immediately. Following the sound, he discovered an old man lying beside the road. The man looked weak and exhausted. His clothes were torn, and it seemed he had been traveling for many days without food. Kofi quickly knelt beside him. "Sir, what happened?" he asked gently. "I have not eaten for 2 days," the old man said weakly. "I thought I could reach the next village, but my strength failed me." Kofi looked into his bag. He only had one piece of bread for his entire journey. If he gave it away, he would have nothing to eat. For a moment, he hesitated. But then he remembered something his mother used to say before she passed away. "A kind heart will always find its reward." Without another thought, Kofi broke the bread in half and gave it to the old man. "Eat," he said kindly. "You need it more than I do." The old man's tired eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, young man," he said after eating. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." Kofi smiled, helped the old man sit under a shaded tree, and then continued his journey. The day grew darker as clouds slowly covered the sky. Later that evening, Kofi reached the edge of a thick forest. As he walked through the tall trees, he heard a strange whimpering sound. He followed it carefully and soon discovered a small injured dog trapped beneath a fallen branch. The animal struggled weakly, unable to escape. Kofi quickly rushed forward. "Don't worry," he said softly. Using all his strength, he lifted the heavy branch and freed the dog. The animal limped out slowly, looking at Kofi with bright grateful eyes. Kofi gently rubbed its head. "You'll be okay now," he whispered. The dog barked softly, as if thanking him, before disappearing into the forest. Night soon arrived, and Kofi slept beneath a large tree, using his small bag as a pillow. The next morning, his journey continued. Days passed as Kofi crossed rivers, climbed rocky paths, and walked through dark forests. The journey to the Forbidden Mountain was harder than he had imagined. But something strange began to happen along the way. Whenever Kofi faced danger, help seemed to appear at the perfect moment. When he lost his way in the forest, a bird flew ahead of him, guiding him back to the path. When he struggled to cross a fast river, a fallen tree formed a perfect bridge. And when wild animals appeared in the distance, they simply watched him quietly instead of attacking. It was as if the world itself had begun to protect him. Finally, on the 6th day, Kofi reached the base of the Forbidden Mountain. The mountain stood tall and terrifying, its peak hidden inside thick clouds. Sharp rocks and steep cliffs covered its sides.
Many people believed the mountain was cursed. But Kofi took a deep breath and began climbing. The path was dangerous and slippery. Several times he nearly fell. The cold wind howled loudly as he climbed higher and higher. Just when his strength was beginning to fade, something incredible happened. The same dog he had rescued earlier suddenly appeared beside him. It barked loudly and began running ahead, showing him a safer path up the mountain. Kofi followed it, surprised but grateful. Higher and higher they climbed, until finally they reached the peak. And there it was. Growing from a small crack in the rock was the most beautiful flower Kofi had ever seen. The golden flower. Its petals shone brightly like pure sunlight. But as Kofi stepped closer, the ground suddenly trembled. A deep voice echoed across the mountain. Who dares to take the golden flower? A giant spirit rose from the rocks, its glowing eyes staring directly at Kofi. Fear rushed through his body, but Kofi stood his ground. I came to complete the king's challenge, he said bravely. The spirit studied him carefully. You are not rich, you are not powerful, why should I allow you to take it? Kofi lowered his head slightly. I have nothing, he admitted, but I try to help others whenever I can. For a long moment, the mountain remained silent. Then the spirit slowly smiled. Your kindness has already spoken for you. Suddenly, the bird he had followed earlier landed nearby. The old man he had helped appeared beside the spirit. And even the little dog stood proudly next to Kofi. The spirit nodded. Kindness is the greatest power of all. With a wave of its hand, the golden flower gently lifted from the rock and floated into Kofi's hands. You have passed the true test, the spirit said. Holding the glowing flower tightly, Kofi began his journey back to the kingdom. And when he finally returned, what happened next would shock the entire kingdom. The morning Kofi left the village, the sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold. The air felt calm, but inside Kofi's heart, a storm of determination was rising. The road ahead was long, dangerous, and uncertain, but he had already made his choice. With only a small bag hanging from his shoulder and a wooden walking stick in his hand, Kofi stepped onto the dusty road that led toward the Forbidden Mountain. He had no horse, no guards, no weapons, only courage. As he walked farther from the village, the houses slowly disappeared behind him. The road turned into a narrow path that twisted through fields and forests. The sun climbed higher, and the heat of the day pressed heavily on his back. Hours later, Kofi came across a small stream beside the road. As he bent down to drink some water, he noticed an old woman struggling to carry a heavy basket filled with firewood. Her back was bent with age, and every step she took seemed painful. Kofi immediately stood up. Grandmother, let me help you, he said kindly. The old woman looked at him with tired eyes. My son, this basket is too heavy for you. You look like you have your own troubles. Kofi smiled gently. Troubles become lighter when we help each other. Without waiting for another word, he lifted the basket onto his back and carried it with her all the way to her small hut at the edge of the forest. The old woman was deeply grateful. Thank you, my son, she said warmly. Your kindness will guide you in ways you cannot yet see. Kofi simply nodded and continued his journey. As the day slowly turned into evening, the forest around him grew darker and quieter. Suddenly, he heard a soft cry coming from behind a bush. He pushed the leaves aside and found a small bird tangled in a hunter's net. Its wings flapped helplessly as it tried to escape. "Easy now," Kofi whispered. Carefully, he untied the ropes and freed the frightened bird. It fluttered into the air, circling above him for a moment before flying into the trees. Kofi smiled and continued walking, not expecting anything in return. Days passed as Kofi traveled across rivers, hills, and thick forests. His feet grew sore, and sometimes hunger gnawed painfully at his stomach. Yet whenever he saw someone in need, he could not ignore it. One evening, while walking along a rocky path, he found a wounded dog trapped under a fallen branch. The animal whimpered weakly. Even though Kofi was exhausted, he rushed forward and lifted the heavy branch with all his strength. The dog crawled out slowly and looked at him with grateful eyes. Kofi gently patted its head before continuing his journey into the night. By the 6th day, the mighty Forbidden Mountain finally stood before him. It was taller and more terrifying than any story had described. Dark clouds surrounded its peak, and cold winds howled down its steep cliffs. Many travelers had turned back at this very sight. But Kofi did not. Taking a deep breath, he began to climb. The path was narrow and dangerous. Sharp rocks cut his feet, and strong winds nearly pushed him back down the mountain. More than once, he slipped and barely caught himself from falling. Just as his strength was beginning to fade, something unexpected happened. A familiar bird suddenly flew down and landed on a rock ahead of him, the same bird he had freed from the hunter's net. It chirped loudly and began flying slowly upward, as if showing him the safest path. Kofi followed it. Soon after, the same dog he had rescued appeared from behind a rock, barking softly and guiding him away from a dangerous cliff. Step by step, they helped him climb higher. Finally, after hours of struggle, Kofi reached the mountain's peak. There, glowing under the pale light of the clouds, was the legendary golden flower. Its petals shimmered like sunlight, even in the cold mist. Kofi stepped forward carefully and reached out to take it. But suddenly, the ground trembled. A deep voice echoed across the mountain. "Stop." From the mist appeared a giant spirit, its glowing eyes fixed on Kofi. "Many powerful men came seeking this flower," the spirit said. "All failed. Why should you succeed?" Kofi stood still, his heart pounding. "I am not powerful," he said honestly. "I am just a poor boy, but I try to help others whenever I can." The spirit studied him in silence. Then something incredible happened. The old woman he had helped appeared beside the spirit. The bird landed gently on Kofi's shoulder. The dog stood proudly beside his feet. They had all come to stand with him. The spirit slowly smiled. "Your kindness has already passed the true test." With a gentle wave of its hand, the golden flower lifted from the ground and floated into Kofi's hands. "You may take it," the spirit said, "for a heart full of kindness is worth more than gold or power." Kofi thanked the spirit and quickly made his way back to the kingdom. When he finally arrived at the royal palace with the glowing flower in his hands, the entire kingdom was shocked. The poor boy, everyone had laughed and had completed the impossible challenge. The king kept his promise. And the princess, who had secretly watched Kofi's journey, saw the goodness in his heart. She chose him gladly. And so the poor boy who once had nothing became the man who won not only the golden flower, but also the heart of a princess and the respect of an entire kingdom. From that day on, Kofi ruled with kindness, proving to everyone that true greatness does not come from wealth or power, but from the goodness within a person's heart.